trying to understand how we can use or manipulate herbivore foraging behaviour just using plant odour rather than having to use fences or shooting and all these quite abrasive control methods. Trying to discover a method how we can actually just quite gently nudge herbivores away from areas we don't want them to be.
Welcome to Ecology Matters, a podcast from the Ecological Society of Australia. In each episode, meet a different ecologist, discover what makes them passionate about Australian ecology, what their hopes and fears are for the future of our natural world, and why they think that ecology really does matter.
I knew I was going to be a field biologist.
I was like, yes, this is what I want to do.
I found that I had a real connection with the land in that area.
I don't think I'm going to be getting bored in the next 5 years, that's for sure.
I'm really interested in changing the world.
So yeah, I think it is going to make a big difference, which is exciting.
I think that's really cool to see that can actually make a really significant difference.
People are starting to appreciate cultural knowledge a lot more than what it would have been appreciated in the past.
I'm really hopeful it's going to make a really positive change to what's going on here.
Joining us this episode is Patrick Finnerty. Patt is a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney and was awarded the 2021 Jill Landsberg Trust Fund Scholarship. With his supervisors, Patt was among the first to show that mammalian herbivores like the swamp wallaby and the African elephant use smell to find and choose between food options. Now, Patt is looking at whether introducing the smell of less favoured or unpalatable plants can be used to deter herbivores from other high-value plants. Patt's research aims to provide alternatives to lethal control or fencing for land managers wishing to protect ecologically or economically valuable plants from browsing damage.
I suppose right at the start in undergrad, I had really good lecturers in not only botany and plant physiology, but in animal behaviour and especially herbivores. So that got me interested in those fields right from the get-go. And then this whole idea came up about we get taught about why herbivores leave foraging patches or why herbivores decide to move to another foraging patch, and also big picture things about, the importance of herbivores in ecosystem function and how crucial they are to a healthy ecosystem. But there was never this question that was answered about how a herbivore actually finds food in the first place. And it might seem quite a simple question from the start, but there hasn't been a real explanation around, how does a kangaroo or a wallaby or any herbivore find the food that it wants? So in my final year of my undergrad, I connected up with Professor Claire MacArthur at the University of Sydney, and I was lucky enough to do a year-long research project with her, which was pretty rare for undergrad to be able to spend a full year investigating something. And we decided to look at how swamp wallabies in Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park in Sydney were able to find foods. Specifically, we kind of visually obscured some eucalypt seedlings and with controls and everything else, but we were able to show that these wallabies were able to find food sources just through smell alone. So then we took these findings and we published a paper on this work, and we took these findings and we decided to go big picture. We went over to South Africa and looked at how, one of the best noses in the business, actually, the African elephant find their food. So what we did, it was a relatively controlled study with what they called semi-captive elephants over there, still able to roam freely and forage, but come in every now and again for educational purposes and are sheltered at night. Just to avoid harm, I guess. And we did a study there and we showed a similar thing. We showed that these elephants were able to find and choose minute amounts of food just through smell, and even distinguish between preferred food choices just through smell alone. And we published a paper on that as well. So this kind of rolled this idea that smell is really important to herbivore foraging. And then recently there's been these ideas about conservation behaviour and using our knowledge about how animals behave and linking these ideas with how we can actually protect wildlife or conserve areas that we want to protect from fire or all of these things. So then this is where this linkage comes between our understanding of how herbivores find food and how we can apply it in a real setting. So this is where my project comes in, and it's pretty big picture and early in the game, but trying to understand how we can use or manipulate herbivore foraging behavior just using plant odor rather than having to use fences or shooting and all these quite abrasive control methods. Trying to discover a method how we can actually just quite gently nudge herbivores away from areas we don't want them to be, specifically, areas recovering from fire or regeneration, or in protecting, threatened plant species from herbivory and all those things. So I suppose that takes you from the start until where I am now, really.
And you're now expanding on this in your PhD. What will you be looking at specifically?
I'm going to conduct all this research in open eucalypt forests at Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park on what we know to be a widespread population of swamp wallabies. And we're using swamp wallabies because they're relevant to both wildlife management and conservation, as they're native. They're a critical threat to endangered endemic flora in the area, and their browsing inhibits natural regen after fire. Specifically, the focal seedling I'll be using is the species Eucalyptus punctata, or grey gum, as a representative focal plant. We know this species occurs naturally in a study site, and we know that it's highly vulnerable to wallaby browsing. And studies have shown that seedling survival rates can be as low as 44% in the area. Why Eucalyptus punctata? Well, this species represents a really major foundational canopy species in the area, and it provides habitat and feed for several threatened arboreal species within Ku-ring-gai. Now, in terms of what smelly, pungent neighbour I'm going to use, I'm going to use this species called Boronia pinnata. I went out and looked for a species within the area that showed no signs of browsing and really smelled. So we landed on Boronia pinnata as this representative, sympatric, low-quality neighbour. Boronia pinnata is a herbaceous species, soft-leaf. It doesn't have any physical defences and thorns or spikes. It's pretty nondescript. It has a nice pink flower, but it really smells, and especially after rain or when it's crushed, there's a lot of smell that comes from this plant. So in terms of my research, I'm breaking down my PhD into 3 specific aims. So firstly, I'm asking whether a neighbourhood of real, pungent, unpalatable plants will be enough to protect these Eucalyptus punctata seedlings from herbivores, or in this case, swamp wallabies. Now, this question is an essential starting point to my research, but ultimately, to determine the suitability of using plant odor alone or virtual neighbours to manage browsing damage, I must first confirm that real, highly pungent, unpalatable neighbours are enough to deter herbivores and provide refuge to these focal plants, to my eucalyptus seedlings. So to do this, I'm going to surround my focal seedlings with a neighbourhood of real, pungent Boronia pinnata plants to see if these smelly neighbours will create a form of associational plant refuge for my focal seedling from wallaby browsing damage. Ultimately, with this idea of this neighbourhood of smelly Boronia pinnata plants, reducing the perceived patch quality from wallabies from afar. I'm also going to compare this treatment by using a neighbourhood of highly thorny plants. I'm going to be using Hakea gibosa, or I think they call it needlebush, as a physical defence neighbourhood comparison. Now, we already know that spiky neighbours can protect plants from large herbivores, and a lot of this work has been done in Africa. So I'm going to use this treatment to see if a chemically defensive neighbourhood or a smelly neighbourhood is equally as effective in deterring herbivores. Now, we've started pilot work already on this, and amazingly, we've shown that even a single Boronia pinnata plant next to a single focal eucalyptus seedling in native bushland significantly reduced the time it took a wallaby to visit the seedling and subsequently reduced browsing damage. So this is just a one-on-one plant we're talking here. So an amazing result to start with, and promising leading into our next experiments. I'm then going to ask whether the odour from real pungent unpalatable plants alone will be enough to protect seedlings from our herbivores. So I'm going to visually obstruct this neighbourhood. The point of this is to show that the odour of real plants alone will be enough to deter wallabies, showing that the smell of Boronia is deterring the wallabies, not the visuals. What I think will be the most interesting part of my research, I'm then going to ask whether we can artificially recreate and deploy odours from Boronia pinnata plants, developing this idea of virtual neighbours to protect our vulnerable seedlings. And this is where I think it gets a bit more sciencey. So first, we need to develop complete odour profiles for Boronia pinnata, my smelly neighbours. What are the specific informative, what we call volatile organic compounds that make the smell of Boronia distinguishable to a foraging wallaby? So once we establish these informative odour compounds or odour components of Boronia, I'm then going to try and create artificial odour cocktails using the most complex combination of volatile organic compound pairs that best represent this species. And with these cocktails, I'll put them into these small glass vials fitted with diffusion tubes. And we're hoping to calibrate these vials to emit odours similar to, if not at the rate of the real plant. And I'm going to put them out as a neighbourhood around my focal seedlings to see if these artificially created virtual neighbours will be enough to deter our wallabies from our focal seedlings. Now, I suppose the question that might be raised here is that if the real plants work to deter wallabies, why not just use them? Well, planting a neighbourhood of low quality plants might work, but it might be problematic because they compete for water and resources for the plants we're actually trying to protect. So with my aim of using virtual neighbours, we might be able to avoid the complications of using a neighbourhood of real plants altogether. So in a nutshell, my whole project is looking at this idea of harnessing the power of unpalatable or low quality plant odours to develop and deploy what we're calling virtual neighbours or artificial low quality plant smell to nudge herbivores away from vulnerable plants in areas we're trying to protect, with the ultimate goal of developing a new non-lethal wildlife management solution.
Ecology Matters is a podcast by the Ecological Society of Australia, a not-for-profit organisation supporting ecologists and ecological science in Australia. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. To learn more about our work, follow us on social media, visit our website or sign up to our newsletter. You can find links to these in the show notes. This episode was produced by Grace Heathcote and Elodie Comprassi. The theme music is Glow by Scott Buckley. Lastly, thank you to all the ecologists who have taken part in this series and shared their perspectives on why ecology matters.